My teacher berated me in front of everyone and then she apologized. That day, the auditorium hummed as if someone had turned an old fan on high and slammed the doors. Our theoretics classes took place in ancient lecture halls where the acoustics were like a tin can. Sound didn't fly, but spread out in waves and hit heads. I, as always, took a seat at the side and, as always, listened not so much with my ears as with my eyes, to lips, to gestures, to the chaotic movements of the crowd. I'm hard of hearing. Not so hard that I need a hearing aid, but hard enough that the noise makes instructions a blur. In my first year, I warned my teachers in advance. If I asked to repeat something, it wasn't I wasn't listening, it was I didn't hear. That was usually enough. Usually. The exam was in the evening after a long day of classes. We'd just been let in, and the professor, the one they described as hot-tempered and uncompromising, was yelling something about backpacks, where to put them, how to sit, what was allowed on the desk. I stood to the side and watched the others. People were flocking to the front row and starting to pile their bags. I think she said, "Forward, I think. Bring your backpack here, go ahead." She shouted again. Noise, rustling, echo. I took a step, but at that moment she turned sharply, and this time to the whole room. "What are you standing there for? Are you deaf?" The air in the classroom froze. Someone dropped a pen, a brief clink sounded, and then it became completely silent. The kind of silence where you can hear your heart skipping a beat. "Yes," I said, quietly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I warned you about this at the beginning of the year." She paled, then flushed red. She shrugged. She glanced at her assistant, who covered her mouth with her hand, either hiding a giggle or surprise, and winked briefly at me. Behind me, my best friend bit his finger to keep from laughing, nervously at the absurdity of the moment. Please bring the backpack forward." She rolled out more quietly and turned away. I took it. I sat down, I wrote it. As I was giving up, she stared at her shoes and muttered, "Sorry." It sounded like she'd swallowed a bone. No eye contact, no, I was wrong. I left the classroom feeling like someone had put something sticky in my pocket and said, "Here you go." After that evening, she never looked at me again. She'd pass me by during lectures as if my chair had a foreign sign on it. But inside me, the empty sorry was growing into a heavy lump, not out of resentment, but out of injustice. I knew I wasn't embarrassed because I was too sensitive. I was embarrassed because I'd been placed on a stool in front of 100 people and jabbed with the same word they jabbed me with as a child when I couldn't hear it the first time. All week, people kept asking me, "Well, you apologized, didn't you?" I nodded, yes. But every yes echoed inside me as a no, because there are apologies that heal, and there are apologies that are just a window dressing, leaving nothing behind. On Sunday evening, I opened the university's website, the Student Rights Protection section. It read bluntly, "If you have experienced discrimination, harassment, or unethical behavior by a faculty member, you can submit a complaint." Below was a form, checkboxes, and a field labeled "Describe the situation." I stared at the cursor for a long time, blinking like a ready-made, "So will you make up your mind?" "I've decided," she wrote calmly and in detail. She included the date, the audience, the subject, the exam format, and her exact response. She noted that she had notified her professors of her condition in advance. She wrote that an apology had been made, but not a public one, and that it hadn't compensated for the public humiliation. She added, "I'm not asking for punishment, I'm asking for rules. That exam instructions be clearly stated and repeated, that professors refrain from stigmatizing remarks, that at the end there be a public record of the error and its correction. And yes, I want to hear an apology as loudly as the thing that humiliated me was said." I pressed send and felt my pulse recede from my temples. It didn't make me feel any better. It felt right. The answer came unexpectedly quickly that very morning. An associate professor from the Academic Ethics Committee invited me to a meeting, an interview to clarify details. I showed up with a printed copy of the letter and a piece of notebook paper where I'd written down everything I was afraid I'd forgotten. They listened attentively. They didn't nod for show, but asked questions about the acoustics of the room, about previous lessons, about how a particular phrase had sounded. As I spoke, I felt a clear line finally forming within me. I wasn't justifying, I wasn't excusing. I was describing, like a witness, like an adult. "We'll be in touch," they said as they parted. "And please, if anyone tries to pressure you, let me know right away." The pressure attempts came faster than I expected. That evening, I received a short email from the professor herself. "We need to discuss the situation. Come tomorrow at 12:10, room 314. This is between you and me." The last two words were in bold. Between you and me was like on the sly. Like, let's pretend nothing happened. I arrived at exactly 12:10, but the door to 314 was locked from the inside. She opened it slightly, glanced down the hallway, and pulled me inside, like it was a secret. "Sit down," she said without looking up. "Okay, so, I apologize for the harshness of my words. It's been a tough day, lots of classes, nerves. You understand what it's like to maintain discipline during an exam, right? I was a bit hasty, of course, but you could have been more attentive too, right?" I looked at her and realized this wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to twist a simple situation into a mutual responsibility, where "you could have" stood next to "I overreacted," as if they were the same measure. She paused after each "but," as if those three-letter scissors were carefully trimming my words. I said, "I didn't come here to hear that I could have done that too. I came for something simple, a public apology in front of the same group in the same room, and that's impossible." she interrupted. We won't make a spectacle of it. It's a hoax. The hype was when you shouted, "Are you deaf?" to a full room, I replied. I didn't ask for volume. You chose it. Now volume is my minimum. She fell silent. She pushed a paper cup of water toward me, as if thirst were a problem and not the point of the conversation. Listen, she said, her voice softer. Reporting to the committee. It's not nice. You're doing well, of course. We're fighting for your rights, but this will reflect on the department, on the ratings, on the students later. I can write you a recommendation. Or she lowered her voice. We'll just forget about it. I guarantee you it won't happen again. I guarantee it. We'll forget it. These words clinked like empty jars. I have 2 conditions, I said, feeling everything inside me calm down. A public apology at the next class, and a final grade for your course, for the year, without any attempts to cut me off from my position. A good, fair one, not automatic, but without any nitpicking. She raised her eyebrows. Are you blackmailing the teacher with a grade? No, I said. I protect myself from blackmail by keeping quiet. I'm not asking for an A for nothing. I'm asking for the criteria to be treated with the same rigor as my hearing abilities, and for an apology to be heard where there was humiliation. She stared out the window. I realized she was looking through the glass for that quick exit she was accustomed to. Let's come to an agreement. Nobody needs this. You understand. But the glass reflected only the 2 of us and the empty hallway. I'll think about it, she said. This is all too much. Okay, I replied, standing up. I'll think about it too. And if by tomorrow evening the committee doesn't have my letter stating that we found a solution, they'll continue as usual. I walked out, and the hallway seemed very long and very bright. At the end stood the assistant, the one who had covered her laughter with her hand on exam day. It was as if she had been waiting for me. Well, how is it? She asked quietly. She wants it between us, I said, and I want it between everyone. The assistant nodded. There was something in her eyes I didn't expect. Not malice, but the support of an adult who seemed to remember what it was like to stand in front of a loud voice. I'm ready to confirm the incident if needed, she said, and thank you for not leaving it. You're not the only one who needs this. That evening, another letter arrived from the teacher. Short, truncated, and clearly written in irritation. You should consider the consequences. Public apologies are not good practice. Let's meet again and discuss alternatives. Finally, I hope this is reasonable. I typed out a reply, equally short, tomorrow at 10 a.m. the committee. Either you write me a public apology and a plan for correct exam rules, or we'll meet as a threesome. You, me, and the committee. The next morning, I did indeed arrive at 10 o'clock. There was no one at the door. At 10:07, the office swung open and she burst in, out of breath and flushed. She held a piece of paper in her hands, a crumpled public apology. And for the first time, she said my name correctly without fuss or irritation. Let's try this, she began from the doorway. I'll read it at the beginning of the next lecture. And, asked the associate professor from the committee. And I ask. She clutched the paper tighter. I ask that you not pass this on. We, the department, will conduct the analysis ourselves. I admit that I was wrong. The words came hard to her, as if each letter creaked, but she spoke them. The students' conditions? The associate professor asked. I'll make a public apology, she said without looking up. Regarding the grades, I can't automatically promise good grades. I can promise transparent criteria, set out in advance, and a lack of bias. And if there's a dispute, a separate appeal will be filed in front of witnesses. I looked at her. 2 feelings warred within me, justice and rationality. The former wanted good, by default, as compensation for that scream. The latter said, you don't need numbers, you need rules. I sighed. Let's do it this way, I said. Transparent criteria, in writing, publicly available. A public apology in the next class. And, I paused, the final grade will be protected from accidental demotion. If my work is on the edge of a grade, the decision will be made in front of the assistant. She nodded. It was no longer between us. It was between everyone, written down in the minutes. When we left the commission's office, she caught up with me in the corridor. She said quietly, I really was wrong. Words sometimes fly out faster than thoughts. Words sometimes hurt more than you think, I replied. And that's why they need to be treated just as publicly. She nodded, and for the first time truly looked me in the eye. No attempt to teach, trick, or explain how the world works. She simply met my gaze. And I realized that from that moment on, we were both leaving the theater of quick roles, like stern, offended, and entering a space where everyone has a voice, even if it's quieter than we'd like. 2 days later, our class began. She walked in, placed a piece of paper on the table, closed her eyes for a moment like someone about to dive into cold water, and said, before we begin, I want to say something important. The audience buzzed, then fell silent. She spoke clearly, without embellishment. During the last exam, I used inappropriate language. I shouted at a student, "Are you deaf?" and thereby humiliated her. It was wrong. I apologized to her personally and to all of you. We've discussed with the committee how to avoid similar situations. The instructions will now be duplicated on the screen, and I'm committed to repeating key points. We will also publish transparent grading criteria. She looked up and met my gaze. It didn't slip. It held. At that moment, something echoed in the audience, like when someone tunes an instrument and the string hits the right note. Thank you, I said out loud, without any pathos, simply so that this thank you would be heard by everyone. The class passed quietly, and for the first time in a long time, I caught myself listening not just through the noise but also through my attention. When the lecture ended, two kids from the back row approached me. Listen, it's cool that you didn't keep quiet. We, too, sometimes don't understand anything during the briefing. We just don't dare ask. I smiled. That was more important than any automatic A's. That evening, I opened the letter from the committee. Attached was the protocol. The apology had been issued, the rules had been published, and the evaluation criteria were publicly available. At the end, it read, "If any further difficulties arise, please let us know." I closed my laptop, and for the first time in all these days, I felt not just right, but finished. Not perfect justice, but the right direction. But the story didn't end there. Every system likes to revert to the familiar. And a month later, during a test, I again encountered a quiet version of the old. Not from her, but from the assistant assigned to monitor the classroom. He walked between the rows and hissed at the students. "Don't move, don't whisper, don't turn around," and repeatedly said, "If someone can't hear you, why come?" I raised my hand. "Please repeat the last instruction," I said. "Our regulations require duplication." He snorted, but walked over to the console and brought up the screen. "Submit Form A to Box 1, Form B to Box 2. I calmly submitted it and left. Not because I had to win a second time, because rules aren't a one-time declaration, but a habit to be maintained. That same evening, I wrote to the teacher, briefly without drama, with the facts. She responded almost immediately. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll brief the teaching assistants." And she did. During the next class, he came up to me and, embarrassed, said "I apologize for the inappropriate words. I was wrong, not perfect, but better." The grades, oddly enough, were the most honest. The criteria were actually laid out. On the midterm, I got exactly the grade I'd written for. They didn't cut me on the edge. My assistant sat next to me while my mentor discussed the contentious issues, and we looked at the answers together, not into each other's eyes. It was exactly what I wanted to hear from the start. Not, "We'll do well for you," but "We'll make it clear to everyone." When the school year ended, I caught myself with a sudden thought. I'm no longer afraid of her, and I no longer want her to be afraid of me. I wanted her to be afraid of her own words, the ones that could hit someone like a stone. And it seems she is afraid of them now. At the end of the year, she called me after class. She awkwardly asked for a minute. She said, "I sometimes think I wouldn't be the teacher I want to be if you'd kept quiet back then." And she smiled faintly. "Thank you for setting the conditions. They were unpleasant, but useful." "Conditions aren't extortion," I replied. "They're the points on which the bridge rests." She nodded, and for the first time since the beginning of the year, it felt like we were standing on the same shore. After the public apology in the auditorium, it seemed like the end had been reached. But the university doesn't operate by the rules of punctuation. Every event here leaves an ellipsis. Rumors spread through the halls faster than I could breathe. Students from other groups came up to me. "Is it true that she yelled at you? Did you really write a complaint?" "Wow, was that even possible?" I answered calmly, without drama. "Yes, it was. Yes, I wrote it. Yes, that's possible." But inside, I felt the attention thickening around me, as if I'd suddenly become the heroine of a faculty story. Not everyone liked it. At one seminar, when the teacher stepped out briefly, a girl in the back muttered so everyone could hear, "Well, yeah, we have special ones here now. Everything is tailored to them." I turned around. "They're not adjusting it to suit me. They're adjusting it to suit the rules, so that tomorrow someone else doesn't end up in the same situation." She snorted, but fell silent. A few guys from the front row then came up and quietly said, "You answered correctly. We, too, often don't hear anything in this jar, but we don't dare admit it." Meanwhile, the commission continued to keep its finger on the pulse. Once a week, I received a short letter. "Let me know if there have been any new incidents. Confirm that the conditions are being met." Dry but important. They showed that the matter hadn't been forgotten. The teacher, on the other hand, tried to normalize oblivion. She no longer raised her voice at me, but she also ignored me. During consultation, she addressed everyone but me, as if my desk were behind glass. She accepted questions but answered curtly, as if she were dismissing them. And one day, when we were preparing for a colloquium, a classmate came up to me and said, "Listen, she was complaining in front of everyone at the department today. Because of one student, we now have to make a big deal out of this. She said you were making a mountain out of a molehill." I wasn't surprised. It was a familiar tactic, to present the problem not as a problem, but as one person's emotion. But inside me, the knot I'd thought I'd loosened after my apology tightened again. I wrote to the committee. Briefly, I'm receiving feedback in the form of indirect pressure. The professor is speaking out in the department. The response was, "We'll take this into consideration. Please document any specific incidents." A couple of days later, I was called back to office 314. This time, the door was open, and inside was not only her, but also the department head. The atmosphere was like a room where someone is trying to put out a fire with newspapers. "We wanted to clarify," the department head began. "Are you satisfied with the changes that were made?" "Yes," I replied. "The instructions are now being repeated. The criteria have been published. But I hear the teacher continuing to discuss the situation behind my back. This violates the agreement." The teacher flared up. "I wasn't discussing it. I was just sharing my experience of how hard it is to work when your every move is being scrutinized." "Your words were reported by the students," I said calmly, "and that's why I'm here." The department head raised his palm. Colleagues, let's be honest. There was a mistake. An apology has been made. The question now is, don't make it worse. We must work together. I looked at him and understood. He wanted peace, not justice. What mattered to him was the silence within the walls, not the fact that someone was swallowed up within that silence. I agree, I said, but peace isn't silence. Peace is when people stop calling me special or too demanding. The teacher lowered her eyes. At that moment, I saw for the first time she was genuinely struggling, not because she felt sorry for me, but because for the first time in many years, she was forced to admit that her word wasn't always law. After this meeting, a strange game began in the department. It was as if they were trying to regain control with little jabs. One day, she'd ask a question in lecture, and when I asked again, she'd emphasize, well, there you go. I have to repeat it again. Another day, she'd drag her feet on assigning points specifically to my group on the report card. But now I had a shield, a committee, rules, an assistant who once whispered, if anything happens, I'll confirm it. And this shield worked. Every time I reminded her, according to the regulations, repeat it. She pursed her lips and repeated it. Every time I calmly wrote a letter to the dean's office, I'm recording a delay in grades. Everything appeared in the system within a day. And the most surprising thing, some of the students began to quietly support him. Listen, it's really clearer now. Thanks for knocking out those rules. We were afraid to ask ourselves, but now we can. What was even more surprising was that one day in the smoking room, I overheard two graduate students arguing. She deliberately provoked the teacher to get her grades. Oh, come on. If it weren't for her, we'd still be sitting in silence, afraid to raise our hands. I walked past and smiled. Let them think what they want. The main thing was that now we had rules, not shouting. But the teacher herself didn't give up. A week after that public lecture, she emailed me again. Let's talk without the committee. The conditions were tough, and you got your way. Maybe it's time to officially withdraw the complaint. It's hanging over the department like an ink blot. We can resolve this civilly. I read this letter and realized she's not afraid of me, but of the paperwork. She's afraid that the word complaint will remain in the archives and loom large during every performance review. I replied, the complaint can only be withdrawn if the conditions are fully met and there is no pressure. At this point, the pressure is ongoing. It's too early to withdraw. There was no answer. But during the lecture, I noticed she looked at me longer than usual, as if trying to guess what I was ready to do next. And that's when the thought first flashed through my mind. What if I set another condition? Not for profit, but to reinforce the lesson. After I refused to withdraw the complaint, the situation took a new turn. Whereas before she'd tried to resolve everything through letters and conversations in the office, now she was practically chasing me. The first time happened in the hallway of the main building. I was walking to a class in a nearby subject when I heard fast heels behind me. I turned around. It was her. Her cheeks were flushed, her breath hitched, as if she'd just run a marathon. Wait, she said, grabbing my elbow. We need to talk. Not here, not in front of people. I carefully pulled my hand free. There are people here, just like there were in the audience. Everything that happened in front of everyone. Why should conversations be secret? She bit her lip and looked around. You don't understand. This could go beyond the department. I could be summoned to the academic council. It's unpleasant for everyone. It was an unpleasant day for everyone, I replied, especially for me. I continued walking. She followed me. I'm ready to apologize. But why turn this into a show? It can be simpler. I'll tell you in person that I was wrong. I'm even ready to write a letter. Just don't leave a paper trail. Those words stuck with me. No need for a paper trail. That meant everything would become a mirage again. That meant tomorrow she could say, I didn't say anything. No, I said firmly. A paper trail is exactly what we need, and publicity is exactly what we need. She stopped and exhaled heavily. Something like panic appeared on her face. A couple of days later, almost the same thing happened again, after the lecture. I was packing my things when she came up to me and quietly said, I have a favor to ask of you. Just don't leave right away. I turned around. I'm listening. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Withdraw your complaint. Please, I'm ready to do anything for you. This anything sounded especially strange. I narrowed my eyes. Everything. What exactly is that? Well, I can give you good marks in the subject. I can turn a blind eye if there's a flaw somewhere. She spoke hastily, incoherently, as if she was in a hurry to sell something that no one needed anymore. I picked up the pen, slowly placed it in my pencil case, and replied, I don't need closed eyes. I need them open. Always. She grimaced, but I could see she was scared. She was used to being the one feared, not the one who was afraid. In the third week after the exam, a real farce began. I was sitting in the reading room when one of the kids whispered, She's been waiting for you by the exit for about 10 minutes. And indeed, she was standing at the door, nervously fiddling with her handkerchief. When I came out, she immediately spoke. I don't want war. I want to come to an agreement. An agreement is when the terms are met, I answered calmly. But right now, all you do is ask and ask. She bit her lip. Okay, state your terms. Clearly. So, I understand exactly what you want. I looked her straight in the eye and counted on my fingers. First, a public apology in the classroom where it all happened. Second, official publication of the grading criteria and their strict adherence. Third, the annual final grade for the course. Not an automatic A, but a fair one, free from bias and petty quibbles. If the work is questionable, a review in front of witnesses. She turned pale. The first thing, I did. Done? I raised an eyebrow. No, you muttered something in the hallway and then said 2 phrases in the classroom, as if you were reading someone else's text. That's not an apology, it's a formality. She clutched her handkerchief so tightly that her knuckles turned white. What do you want to hear? For me to kneel? No, I replied. I want to hear it as loud and clear as it sounded then. Are you deaf? A pause fell between us. People in the hallway glanced around. It was a strange sight, a student and a teacher standing opposite each other, as if in a duel. Think about it, I said finally. You have a choice. Either you do this honestly, or the committee will see it through. I walked away. This time she didn't follow, but the next day she intercepted me at the buffet. She bought me coffee and sat down next to me. I'm ready, she said quietly. But please, no commission, no protocol. I took a sip of tea and looked at her over the mug. You still don't understand. I don't need your quietly. I need it so that tomorrow when another student is afraid to ask again, they know. You don't yell at them for that. You apologize for that, publicly. She lowered her head. A long silence. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. But you have to promise to remove the complaint from the case file. The complaint will only go away when the conditions are met, I replied. And not before. That evening, I wrote to the committee. The teacher is proposing a private arrangement. I've reiterated the terms. I'm prepared to record the public apology in the presence of witnesses. The response was, accepted. If the terms are not met, the complaint will remain valid. Thank you for your persistence. I turned off my laptop and smiled genuinely for the first time. The rules weren't just my words anymore. They were printed in emails. When the day of the next lecture arrived, I knew today was the day. For the first time in a long time, I sat in the auditorium not with anxiety, but with the feeling of a stage before the curtain. The rows buzzed. The students chatted, some joked, some sneaked a bun, and only I caught every sound, the expectant hum that always precedes something important. The teacher entered a little later than usual. She had a bag over her shoulder and a folder of papers, but her movements were awkward, as if every word was already a heavy weight in her throat. She placed her things on the desk, took a deep breath, and tapped her pen on the board. Quiet, please, she said. The audience gradually fell silent. She looked at us for a long moment, as if checking to see if she and not we was ready. Before we begin, she said, I want to say a few words. A whisper ran through the ranks. Everyone knew what was about to be discussed. During the last exam, she continued, I made a grave mistake. I shouted out a remark that sounded humiliating and completely unacceptable. Are you deaf? It was wrong. I offended the person I was supposed to support. I apologize for that. Her voice wavered, but she managed it. Furthermore, we developed rules together with the commission. Instructions will now be duplicated. The criteria will be set out openly, and each of you has the right to ask again if something is unclear. This is not a sign of weakness. It's the norm. She fell silent. The audience fell silent, only the sound of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. And then someone quietly clapped their hands. First one, then 2 more, then the entire row. And then the entire audience was clapping, not loudly, not like at a concert, but evenly and earnestly, a sign that they had heard. I looked at her. She met my gaze, and this time she didn't look away. After a couple of reactions, the group was divided into 2 camps. Some said, well done, you pushed through. Now things will be easier for us too. I never thought that someone would dare to go against a teacher like that. Others whispered behind her back, well, there you go. She put on a show. Because of one scene, now everyone is obliged to listen to these rules. She simply got good grades for herself. I heard both sides, and I understood. Everyone had their own truth. But inside, I was calm. I knew I wasn't doing this for the show, but so that next time no one would be afraid to ask, repeat this. We confirmed with the commission, the public apology has taken place. The rules have been communicated to the students. The conditions have been partially met. The final grade remains. I wrote back, I request that the evaluation be conducted as transparently as possible. If the final score is marginal, I demand the presence of an assistant as a witness. They agreed. The final assignments were due in a month. I prepared especially diligently. I didn't want to give any indication that this was all just for the buck. I took notes, rewatched lectures, and even went to additional consultations with my assistant. The exam went smoothly. The teacher behaved politely, clearly repeating instructions, even double-checking that the back rows could hear. I caught this and almost smiled. This was real change. A week later, the scores appeared in the system. Mine was high, but not the maximum. Fair, according to the criteria. I sighed with relief. That meant the word without bias wasn't just an empty one, and yet one scene stayed with me for a long time. After the exam, when we were handing in our assignments, she stopped me at the table. Her voice was quiet, but no longer filled with the same nervous tension. I know this wasn't just an exam for you. It was a struggle, and thank you for seeing it through to the end. I nodded. It wasn't a fight against you. It was a fight for all of us. She looked down, and I realized that at that moment she really heard. The story of my public apology raged for a long time. It seemed like it was all over. The rules had been written, the grades had been given, the conflict had been resolved. But the university lives by the laws of memory. Even a fleeting scene can become a legend for years to come. I walked down the hallway, catching the glances of unfamiliar students. Some nodded approvingly, others looked warily. I heard a whisper, "It's that girl." Yeah, because of her, they're repeating instructions everywhere now. Some even came up to me themselves. One first-year student said timidly, "Thank you. I also have trouble hearing in the back rows, but I was always too embarrassed to ask again." Now the teachers repeat things themselves. It really helps. These words were more important to me than any points. Things got more complicated at the department. The department head called me into his office one day and said, "We support students, but you have to understand, there's a fine line. If everyone complains, the system will collapse." If everyone complains, I replied, the system will change, and it will become more honest. He sighed but didn't argue. The teacher maintained a detached demeanor. She followed the rules, but without unnecessary emotion. Sometimes I caught her glance, and there was a flicker of something akin to resignation. She no longer yelled or sarcastically lashed out, but I sensed it was hard for her to adjust to the fact that her word was no longer final. A couple of weeks later, I was invited back to the committee. 3 associate professors and a university lawyer were there. They asked, "Do you want to officially close the complaint?" I thought about it. On the one hand, yes, the conditions have been met, and there's no formal reason to keep the case open. On the other hand, I saw how quickly things could go backwards. "I'm ready to close," I said, "but on one condition. Let the new rules be mandatory for all the teachers in our department, not just her." They exchanged glances. The lawyer raised his eyebrows. "This is already a system requirement." "Exactly," I replied. "Otherwise, my case will remain an isolated incident. It should become the rule." This idea soon reached the dean's office. Then one day, a message appeared on the general mailing list. "We remind faculty about the need to review exam instructions and make grading criteria publicly available. Students have the right to repeat exams without risk of sanctions." I read it and smiled. My personal, "Yes, I really am deaf," became an official document for hundreds of people. But not everyone was happy. At one seminar, I overheard a couple of seniors discussing, "Now any complaint will be taken seriously. Is that bad? It means the teachers will be tougher, so that no one can pick on you." I intervened. Tougher doesn't mean fairer. If they become afraid of complaints, it means they know the complaints are justified. They exchanged glances but did not argue. Meanwhile, the professor herself took a surprising step. In one of the lectures at the end of the semester, she said, "I want you to know everyone makes mistakes, but admitting them is also part of the profession. We teach you to be specialists, but we ourselves are learning to be human." And then, speaking to me personally in the hallway, she quietly added, "I don't know if you've forgiven me, but I'm grateful for the lesson." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded. Because forgiveness isn't just a word. It's a process. And it wasn't over yet. By the end of the year, I felt it wasn't enough for me to just have the rules changed. I wanted to cement them permanently, so that future students wouldn't have to start from scratch every time. And then I had a new idea, to approach the student council and propose creating a code of respectful behavior, a document that would stipulate no discrimination based on hearing, vision, or any other disability. And no what, deaf, even as a joke. It was with this idea that I entered the next semester. When the new semester began, I felt the public apology shouldn't just be a memory. Yes, it was technically over. The committee had closed the complaint, the rules were set, and the grades were fair. But I knew that if I relaxed, then in a year or two, some other student would hear the words, "Are you deaf?" again. That's why I went to the student council. We gathered in a small room on the 4th floor, smelling of dust, old furniture, and vending machine coffee. I outlined the idea, to create a code of respectful conduct, not a formal code of ethics that sits in folders gathering dust, but a document that actually works. In classes, during exams, in the hallways. "This isn't just about my story," I said. "It's about everyone with special needs, hearing, vision, and accent, and illness. Any joking word can become a stigma. If we have a clear code, students will have protection and teachers will have a guide." The council members began to buzz. Some nodded. Yes, it's about time. Others were dubious. The teachers will take this as an attack. But in the end, we formed a working group and began drafting the project. We took the document to the dean's office. They received it with caution, but without any outright refusal. "Okay, we'll consider it," the dean said. "But keep in mind, faculty are a proud bunch. Many will perceive this as a sign of distrust." "It's not mistrust," I replied. "It's insurance." The most unexpected thing happened later. I was stopped in the hallway by that same teacher. "I heard," she said quietly, "that you are working on a codex." I tensed. I expected a reproach, sarcasm, a new round of conflict, but instead I heard, "If you want, I can support you." I blinked. "Support? You?" "Yes," she sighed, "because now I know what it's like to be wrong out loud. If you bring the project up for discussion, I'll say it's necessary." I looked at her, trying to figure out, was this a clever ploy to cleanse herself from her colleagues, or a genuine desire to change? But there was something new in her eyes, weariness and honesty. "Okay," I said, "then let's do it together." We were sitting next to each other at a department meeting. I was a student, she was a teacher, and when the conversation turned to the code, she was the first to raise her hand. Yes, mistakes happen, and I've felt it myself. The code isn't about control, it's a reminder that words are more important than they seem. The colleagues exchanged glances. The department head chuckled but remained silent. The project was adopted, first as a recommendation, then as a mandatory requirement for all faculty exams. When I left that meeting, I felt a strange sense of balance inside. I remembered the first day, her scream, "Are you deaf?" And I remembered this day when the same woman said, Words are more important than they seem. Between those points, a whole road lay, with complaints, committees, tears, letters, threats, and conditions. And now I knew this road was not in vain. At the end of the year, we met again in the hallway. She stopped, looked at me, and said, "I'm still learning how to apologize. But thanks to you, at least I've started." I smiled. I'm still learning to listen. Sometimes not with my ears, but with my attention. We went our separate ways, but inside, I still had the most important thing. A story that began with humiliation ended with a change in rules for hundreds of students. And while some might think I gained grades or put on a show, I knew the truth. I knew that one quiet, "yes, I really am deaf," could change an entire department, and perhaps one day, the entire university.